Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the 6-5 podcast. It's episode 175. Pat, we are out of practice. We skipped last week. I can't believe it.
I can. There was literally nothing going on.
Last week, we should ask the audience though, like in the situation where there is a week and there's not much going on, do you want to hear Pat and I just talk about, what's up, what's on our mind? Would you be willing to take the risk to just hear the conversations that Pat and I have? Could be very interesting. No, maybe. People want to get on the inside, Pat. Anyways, another great week. Very excited to be back. It's Friday. It's 132,000 degrees here in Austin, Texas. And we don't care because we're inside and we've got air conditioning on. But hope everybody's doing really well out there. Pat, we've got a good show this week. A lot of policy-related stuff. We've got quite a bit of coverage on things going on with the FTC. Very busy, being very ineffective. That's the preamble, in my opinion. We're going to talk a little bit about the Broadcom-VMware deal. We've got some updates policy-wise on China. China's on the offensive, if that's even possible in this whole semiconductor thing. We're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft and the Activision deal. Adobe and Amazon, it was a Prime week. Now, we don't talk a ton of e-commerce here on the show, but Pat, it was Prime week and like $13 billion worth of stuff got bought in a 2-day period of time. And Adobe had some pretty interesting analytics. So we'll chat about that. We're going to talk about IBM, and then we're going to talk about Google and some of the innovation they've got going on their large language models and chatbots. Can't be always only about OpenAI, but it can be always only about you. And that's what's really important here. All right. So for those of you that have not been with us before or just don't remember, we just do this in the beginning. Quick disclaimer. This show is for information and entertainment purposes only. And while we will be talking about publicly traded companies, please not take anything we say as investment advice. Pat, Broadcom deal is done. Or is it?
That's a good tee up. You didn't let me riff on how great it is to be here with my bestie.
All right. We want.
Hey,
Pat, before we get into the first topic, how are you doing today, buddy?
I appreciate you asking because, it's not about me, but it's kind of about me. No, I'm doing great, man. I've been here for 3 weeks, no travel, and I literally feel like I am a new person. So I'm glad to be here, but as we're going to talk probably at the end of the show, I'll be back out on the road again.
Yeah, it's about to get ugly.
Loving life.
It's about to get ugly. We were talking offline. You see, everybody, this is a reason to get with us and convince us to do the offline show online. And we were running through this, and we're basically looking at our calendar. We're like, this is a disaster. This is a disaster. So much tech, so many events, so much demand. I mean, Pat, you are the number one analyst in the world.
It's because you let me do that, Dan. You're an enabler, and I appreciate that.
I would never. I'm a pretty competitive guy. It would be hard to believe that I would let anybody be number one. But, sometimes when your mentor is just crushing it, look, the Karate Kid never kicked Miyagi's ass. It never happened on any of the movies, and it's not going to happen in this one. And I'm okay with it. I don't know. Ralph Macchio was not all that. He never looked all that tough to me. I mean, I actually watched that, by the way, just a little fun backstory. On the way to the UK, went to the British Grand Prix. And yes, I watched The Karate Kid as a movie.
Oh my God.
First of all, cinematography's come a long way. I just don't know if you kind of watch back to those kinds of movies. Second of all, Daniel LaRusso was quite skinny. I just don't know if he could really have been that tough. But I still think it was a great movie. I actually still found myself very entertained. Okay, so
we're gonna talk about this. Okay,
Pat, Broadcom deal, it's done.
Yeah. So these are always a long-term saga as anything has to do with regulatory bodies. But the deal was approved by EU regulators with some conditions, and those conditions have everything to do with competitive hardware folks like Marvell, likely NVIDIA, Samsung, and maybe even Cisco. And also, at least according to AP, also talked about potential future competitors. I just love how these regulatory antitrust bodies are looking to the future and not actually what happens, but it is where we are right now. And by the way, all of this was a little bit farcical, as all you have to do is first of all be a business person and understand business, and look at Broadcom's business model and the way they make money and what they're motivated by. I mean, it's all about money. I mean, it always has been, and it always will. The amount of cash that this company brings in is staggering compared to any other semiconductor company and even most tech companies out there. Broadcom is buying VMware for its multi-cloud capabilities, which, to be honest, VMware hasn't been able to monetize that well. If you look at their revenue profile, Hawk, early on committed to not raising prices on specifically on virtualization. And, what people don't even understand as well, it's not that hard as you think to shift and move off of a certain virtualization vendor, let's say going from VMware to KVM or Microsoft. It's not that hard. There are companies that this is all that they do. And at least in terms of virtualization, VMware makes most of their money that supports old hardware, not supporting new hardware or cutting off older competitive hardware. And the last comment that I'll make about the monetization is, you make let's say $500 on a NIC card and $14,000 on VMware licensing. Why on earth would you prioritize hardware over software licenses? So I think this deal is going to go through, and I think it's just up. And I said this, I think, in the first video we did on this. VMware is going to have to, Broadcom's going to have to make some concessions, and it looks like they did with EU, and they'll make those concessions likely globally with the same cast of characters like Marvell, Samsung, Intel, and NVIDIA. And this deal is going through.
So, yeah, let's move on. No, I'm kidding. I've said this for a while. I think a victory lap queue is in order for you and I. There was some naysayers in the public domain that desperately didn't want this deal to go through. They were wrong. They were all wrong. These are the same people that don't think Apple should probably be investigated for any of their app store and competitive strategic moves that basically, make you pay a toll to play in the marketplace. Anyway, I digress. There just wasn't enough here. Now, the EU, the UK, the FTC, they all need to get their pound of flesh. And their pound of flesh is sometimes going to be in dollars, and in this case, sometimes going to come in concessions. There are certain concerns. The Marvell concern is probably the most substantial, somewhat unrelated, but related, to make sure that there's competitive material provided for networking requirements. Pat, candidly, I find it somewhat shocking it's taking this long, but it is a large deal. You're talking about more than $60 billion. You're talking about a significant disruption, in a supply, in a channel, in the way customers consume this product. I'm gonna make another prediction. I know this probably won't make all the VMware fans happy. The company will be substantially more successful under Broadcom than it has been. And I'm not talking about success from a product adoption standpoint. I'm talking about the company's ability to make money. Hock Tan, and if you haven't watched our 6.5 interview with Hock, he's prolific in this particular area, and he's incredibly competent to look at a company. There's some interesting data points about like the number of employees at Broadcom versus the number of employees at VMware, and then the amount of revenue and then the amount of profit. I think you're going to see another version of this kind of wildly slimmed down organization. And I think VMware plus Broadcom, I could see a yield of 30% reduction in headcount. And I'm not saying that through a positive lens. I'm saying that through the lens of Hock is going to find a way to move away from these kind of smaller EBITDA production. And he's going to be able to drive high dollar per share value in terms of EBITDA on the product. He's going to maximize the success of the strong products. He'll probably put out or put to rest and sunset some of the innovations that either hadn't taken off or didn't have longer term potential. But to your point, without getting down the whole path of why this is a good deal, this went through because it should. This went through because it wasn't anti-competitive in a substantial way. It got held up because of the size. Moving on, this deal, we're going to talk about it one more time probably when it actually gets done.
Yeah.
But the fact that we've had to talk about it this much.
Well, here's what's so weird too, Dan, is that, they're a hardware company with a little bit of software buying more software, right? It's not like gigantic software company buying a competitive software company or a giant hardware company buying a competitive hardware company. I mean, this is so far out of the lens. It just absolutely makes no sense to me. It's just weird. And again, kind of gets into this just overall oddity of the regulators. Either they're looking at the wrong things and the wrong companies. They're looking in a crystal ball in the future, as opposed to wanton disregard for antitrust damages that already happened, and let's penalize those companies or maybe break them up into pieces or regulate them higher. I hate regulation, but when you have companies breaking the law like Apple, I mean, things really need to happen. And then the basic lack of understanding of business 101. I feel like I knew more about business when I was 22 than these East Coast educated Ivy Leaguers at the FTC and the DOJ. They just don't understand the reality of business. And it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. It's a waste of time, and it's inhibiting innovation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, the East Coast elites, I think, is what you're kind of trying to say.
Maybe.
It's not.
There are West Coast elites too.
It's not just about that. It's about political agendas. And the problem is that, are we regulating or are we politicking? And
are we punishing success? Right.
Well, but what I'm saying, like, I agree I agree,
yeah.
But I'm saying the most successful company that's most obviously teetering on the line of legality as in terms of antitrust law doesn't really get regulated.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess there is a too big to be regulated that go with the banks. It's the JP Morgan of tech. So yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. It's going to be a really fun one to watch. So speaking of policy, so, a couple of weeks ago, you and I had an interesting conversation about what was going on in China as the U.S. continued to impose restrictions. And now, some of those restrictions included, the controls of machinery that, including, and most importantly, ASML out of the Netherlands, and not allowing China to get the machinery required to basically move forward on 5.3, 20 angstrom, 18A, et cetera. These next generation nodes has put China in a really precarious position, especially with the onset of AI as the most important trend for the next decade, if not more. China is in a position where they're playing catch up without the tools to catch up. So this isn't a situation where China can just buy its way out. You did see the last week Ant Group, the big long saga in the courtroom, settled around at $1 billion fine, which, given what was going on in China, it's an interesting turn of events where China seems to be rotating back to enabling its largest tech companies to be successful, kind of winding down some of the regulation to slow their growth, slow the development of, wealthy iconoclast leaders that aren't part of necessarily the Chinese Nationalist Party. We all know about the Jack Ma saga and what's gone on there. And it's related but unrelated, but China is feeling the pressure right now to be able to build out AI infrastructure and to compete in the AI space. We saw that China squeezed Micron. Why did they squeeze Micron? Well, frankly, my opinion on Micron was more that it was not the imperative product. If they wanted to really show some weight and push, they might squeeze NVIDIA. But why in the world would they do that? They desperately need NVIDIA. But what does China have? Resources. China has resources. And this is a really delicate tightrope that has to be walked right now because China has resources. The U.S. needs them. In this case, they're talking about gallium. They're talking about germanium. These are two specific resources that are produced almost exclusively in China. You're talking about the vast majority of gallium or of germanium, over 60%, over 80% of gallium. And these are important metals that can be that are part of the manufacturing of semiconductors. And a lot of people don't realize, but these chips don't just come out of thin air, and they're not made out of all synthetics. There's a number, just like lithium, that or the nickel that's going to be used in batteries. We talk about that sometimes. These are very important natural resources that are produced in limited quantities. Now, interestingly enough, this isn't something that's in limited production in China because that's the only place that has it. So this is where it becomes a very interesting debate. Is already phones are ringing around the world. Countries like South Korea, Russia, Japan, Ukraine. I know. Why is it Russia and Ukraine? You notice themes with wars? Anybody? Anyway, a lot of this can be produced in Russia and Ukraine, also in in Japan and South Korea, but as well, I believe Canada, Germany, Japan, Slovakia through recycling, and even in the U.S. Point is that nobody's manufacturing anymore because we've outsourced our entire supply chain to China, and we still haven't entirely fixed that yet. We're going to see that get turned back on, but it's not instantaneous. And in the short run, by limiting shipping and controlling the export, it could cause another strain in the supply chain, which could create a strain in terms of the availability of some of these semiconductors that we need. We all saw what happened during the last supply chain crunch. It can be a massive problem. Having said that, some of these crackdowns could be more price impactful, where some of them could be more supply driven. But the real question, Pat, for me, and something I'd love to get you to weigh in on too, is, China has to walk this tightrope. They want more A800s, but we're not letting them have them. I'm sure they're getting them through whatever markets they can, which is illegal, but I just can't imagine they're not trying to obtain them in some way, shape, or form. But the U.S., by the way, is the largest consumer of Chinese produced goods. And so there's a lot of kind of tit for tat going on here. Is if China cracks down too hard on the U.S., it can become a bit of a problem for China in its own economic growth if we stop buying as much stuff from China. Having said that, we need everything from China because we've basically created this weird codependence, and we don't get stuff from other parts of the world, and other parts of the world largely aren't manufacturing. So it feels like both sides have a hand on the rope, and you can kind of push and you can pull, but the global and interdependence between these two things are so tightly wound that if either over rotates, Pat, like if we actually went to war, like a real, on the ground war with China, where would everybody get our stuff? Like, where would our stuff come from? Like, what would we even do? I mean, we've literally created this incredible dependence. It's a codependence, though. You and I joke about the show, if one of us quits, it's over, mutually assured destruction. Like, we can't actually go to war. So this is a really interesting and tedious thing. It's like China's pulling these little threads and US is making these big microaggressions. And in the end, there's no way we can actually function without one another. So Pat, very interesting story to continue watching and develop.
I think it was a really good breakdown. So China, when I started working in 1990, their technological capability was to have through-hole PCBs, meaning taking a transistor or resistor that has a metal wire on the end and soldering it into a breadboard. Okay, those were their capabilities. And in 1996, the only thing I relied on China for were power supplies what I call metal bending, like sheet metal, to create an enclosure for a server or a PC, and plastic injection molding, right? Which is you spray plastic into this huge auto-sized. They didn't have rows. They didn't have good rows. They didn't have good power, and then the West enabled China to go in. And to China's credit, basically they dictated what was going to happen. If there was a house in the way of the highway, they would just actually remove an entire neighborhood. Okay. And from a policy standpoint, we believed that we could turn China capitalist. Okay. And if we turn China capitalist, they would not be communist, and we wouldn't have a potential thermonuclear war. Also, we wanted to increase the amount of decreased costs for particularly technology, for clothes, for pretty much anything. And so we outsourced it to China. So like you said, so this goes back a long way. And China invested. They invested in education, in PhDs, in college students, and their population, even if as a percentage is not as literate as the United States, they have 4 times more people than we do, 3 to 4 times more people than we do. So they're just, this absolute powerhouse. So, and then about 10 years ago, China basically throttled companies like Cisco, IBM, Microsoft. They were not allowed to participate in anything that was called critical infrastructure. And this is a fact, not opinion. Huawei stole Cisco IP to help create their networking technology. That is just an absolute fact. And by the way, if the knockoff Chinese Boeing 737 looking product looks 99% like a Boeing 737, it's because those designs were ripped off as well. So then China started, stealing a lot of U.S. intellectual property. Still today, China bans Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and in some cases makes it so hard. Dan, if you want to open up Futurum Group China, guess what the maximum percent of ownership you can have?
49.9.
That's right. You do not own, you are not the majority shareholder of that company. Do you know what the deal is if Chinese companies want to incorporate in the United States?
I don't, not off the top of my head.
100%. You can have 100% ownership. So we have a we always
fair, Pat. Seems
what's
fair.
that?
That seems fair.
I mean, it's capitalism, it's absolutely not fair. So, and I'm just saying this just to put this in context of how far this goes back. And it's exactly what NVIDIA and Micron are caught in the middle of now. By the way, I'm working on a column about NVIDIA and are we actually safer if we restrict NVIDIA products in China. So check it out. That's all I got.
That's
all I got.
That's it. Okay. That's a good one. I by the way, we clearly like that topic. I love our segments on that topic. Always very, very interesting. So let's stay on the theme of regulatory. I think this is the last one for the day. We did discuss the possibility of covering, the FTC is now going after OpenAI again, but I'm going to take a breather on that one. We'll come back to it. But in Microsoft news, that might be a potential L for Microsoft, but let's talk about a W for Microsoft. By the way, called this one. Did you call this one? I know I called this one. The Microsoft-Activision deal is passing.
No, I think that was a good call. I didn't lean into it as hard as you did just because it wasn't as straightforward as a hardware company buying a software company. But no, let's dive in here. So Microsoft is trying to buy Activision. Activision is one of the largest makers of amazing software. World of Warcraft, some of my son Patrick's, his favorite games are done by this company. Attracted big time scrutiny, of course, by Lena Khan's FTC. And they sued for an injunction to stall the go-ahead of this to happen. The FTC said, don't do it. Microsoft said, no, we're moving forward. FTC sued. Well, the FTC lost in U.S. District Court in San Francisco on July 10th, I think a mere 4 days ago. The FTC, you thought this was over, right? We thought this was a done deal because, hey, it's approved in EU, Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Serbia, Chile, Japan, South Africa, South Korea, and China. It's all been approved. By the way, I didn't know that Serbia or Ukraine had its own approval. I guess they would. They're sovereign countries and not part of the EU. I don't know. I guess not. So FTC appealed. So this is the only dangling chad to move forward. And listen, Microsoft is making concessions to what is just by fact, not editorial, a dominant Sony in console gaming. So is there really anything left here? I don't think so. This deal's going through.
Yeah, I mean, this one probably doesn't require as much time as the China one by any means, but it was really interesting. My bet, sometimes these things are really scientific and sometimes it's more gut. There was definitely reasons, definitely concerns. You saw some of those leaked emails that talked about the guy that basically said, this is how we can kill Sony. Yeah. I mean, there's literally emails that talked about like, this is what we can do to and obviously things like that are going to have to be addressed. But there's also, in handset mobile, in the era of mobile gaming, console isn't everything anymore. There's so many ISVs and gaming developers and gaming options and gaming platforms, and it's like, yes, there are some significant platforms where gaming is consumed on the phones, on the consoles, on computers, PCs, desktops. But having said that, there's also a lot of optionality as to what games and where you get your games and what platforms you want to play. And I just thought there was, Pat, just frankly, just too many options that was going to make it very hard to determine that there was really a massive risk of over rotating to anti-competitive. I mean, and plus NVIDIA has one. I mean, NVIDIA has a gaming platform now, Pat. So, I mean, they're the world's largest company now, aren't they?
$1.1 trillion. I wonder when regulators start looking at NVIDIA.
Oh, geez. I don't know. I mean, they only have like 99% of the training market. It's like 95, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sidebar. Let's talk about that later. Anyway, but long story short, I mean, there's just options. There's just a lot of options. So while I'd love to say that, my decisioning was incredibly science-based and I talked to, Lena Khan and had a chance to go around the world, I just felt that there was enough optionality. And heck, if Japan pushed it through, it felt like they were the one that had the most to lose in the deal.
Yeah, like isn't that odd? That's a great observation. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Yes. So, with all that in mind, I think they knew there just wasn't enough to push and to fight. So anyways, that's kind of it. I mean, good for Microsoft. There is an appeal. I guess that means it's not technically done, but at some point they're going to have to let the they're going to have to take the ropes off and let this thing get done, let this thing go through as it should, as it is, as it will, as it was. So, all right, rock and roll. There we go. Pat, let's talk about it. Let's talk about Prime Day a little bit. Let's talk about, data, Pat. Let's talk about data, and let's talk about, Adobe has a really interesting way that it measures and has insights around Amazon Prime Day. Now, a little bit of background, if you've been under a rock and you weren't watching our show and then you were under another rock and you hadn't heard about Prime Day, this is kind of like the penultimate moment of people buying stuff they don't need with money they don't have to impress people that don't care.
My gosh, dude, that was so good.
Thanks. I heard that somewhere a long time ago. I'd love to take like full credit for it, but it's It's just full of useless information and quips and things I like to say. But
yeah, it's like a meme, dude. You verbalized a meme.
Yeah,
you
got to do that like once a year. And then this is where we need our producers to do like a super cut of me doing that.
Yeah,
and then that becomes a GIF.
Yes.
That I send to my family when they're ripping up my credit card.
Yep.
Anyway, but look, here's the numbers. In 2-day total spend, Pat, $12.7 billion in the US. Now here's a question. Do you think it was up or down from last year?
Oh gosh, I'm saying it was up.
It was. Now, given the year of austerity that we're having and all the cutbacks, it's amazing that we're like running towards record S&P, and we're in the process right now of seeing another stock bubble. The Magnificent Seven, home sales, even with high interest rates, are through the roof. Luxury goods, I think Bernard, the LVHM guy, is like the richest in the world. So I really am struggling to figure out where the world's at. Are we more in debt? Do we have money under our mattresses?
We are more in debt. Yep. Yes, we are.
Was the inflation, and all the money handed out during COVID just well tucked away, or are people just absolutely broke and this bubble's about to burst? It's really it is kind of hard to tell, because we've been hearing for almost 2 years now that it's about to burst, and it hasn't yet bursted. I mean, we did have a couple of banks that almost failed, but they didn't ultimately fail, or they kind of failed, but we bailed them out. And I think JP Morgan tripled in size yet again. I mean, talk about creating a too big to fail. Anyway, I digress. But 12.7 billion, 6.1% growth. So not massive, but for Amazon, it's another record. Another 2 days of sales, similar to Moor Insights, about 12.7 billion over the last 2 days. Look, when people have the best analyst in the world, buddy,
I'm pretty sure that my bookings this week were like $5,000. So,
oh, come on. Don't be. See, this is why you got to sign up for the private stream. You get all these interesting innate details about the business.
I know just how poor I am.
But, where were the discounts? Some interesting Adobe data shared that the biggest discounts came on electronics. 14% was the average discount. But here's a really interesting thing, Pat. These discounts for being huge really weren't that huge. 14% on electronics, 12% on apparel, 12% on toys, 9% on furniture, 8% on computers, 7% on appliances, 6% on sporting goods, and 5% on televisions, which I guess are not electronics somehow. But anyway, my point is that you kind of my thing about buying stuff you don't need with money you don't have to impress, legitimately the discounts aren't really that good. But the company does a remarkable job of using this day as a moment to entice people to come to the site and buy things. And it was an incredibly impressive couple of days for Amazon, which, like I said, is doing a wonderful job of appealing to the American condition. What do people buy? Appliances was a big buy. Housekeeping supplies, which I'm not quite sure what they were, but appliances were up 50% from the last Prime Day. People were doing it on mobile, Pat. 44.8% of people were doing the shopping on their mobile device. So I know you and I vacillate between what we do on our PC and what we do on our mobile, but what's happening is we are spending money on our mobile devices. And so basically, Adobe does this. They go really in depth. They look, at analysis. Here's what they kind of a trillion visits to U.S. retail sites, of looking at 100 million SKUs across 18 categories, by far more than any other company research organization. So the Adobe data is just really, really interesting as it kind of looks at the habits, the behaviors, the spend, the patterns. But it also, Pat, in our world of tech, shows a very interesting capability that we can do, what we can drive with data analytics and AI to be able to, in just a few days, within seeing $13 billion of spend, have so much insight as to how that money was spent and what that means. So interesting stuff. Just a little different vibe for our show, but I thought it was super fascinating.
No, it is. It is good stuff. And, it's interesting. The Adobe Analytics part is pretty cool. I didn't even know they did that.
Did it get it done?
Yeah.
You got anything you want to add there, or are you going to let me just kind of have that one as a free for all?
No, you just do that as a free for all.
All right, buddy. Well, thanks for letting me have that. Thanks for letting me dive into that one, Pat. I know sometimes, I always say, like, I want to talk about stuff that everyone cares about, and I'm not saying everyone doesn't care about everything we talk about, but let's face it, like FTC regulator stuff, like, this is for the tech world, like, that's what our show is really for. But like when we talk about Tesla, or occasionally we talk about Apple, it's like everybody cares about that. So every once in a while we do it. We spark, and that's why we got 2,000 people watching the show right now as we speak. It might be a little more than that, but you know what I'm saying. So let's talk, Pat. GA. We don't do this all the time, but when important things go GA, we do like to talk about it. One of the most important launches, I think, in the AI space this year that went less talked about because it was really going to drive the enterprise and not the consumer use case, was IBM Watson.ai and Watson.data, and they went GA.
I know. You gonna let me talk about this?
No, I wanted to kind of make sure I got a little bit of the preamble in. I was just setting you up. Here. I'm just setting up the pass. Setting up the pass. You can dunk it.
I got it. So back in May, the 6.5, Dan and Pat, we went to IBM Think, and IBM made a ton of announcements about AI. And by the way, over the last 2 months or 3 months, it isn't necessarily unique. Everybody is making AI announcements, primarily because of the impact that it has on the company's valuation and stock market. So this has become a board to executive leadership team to everybody else. And it's very similar, by the way, I think, the same froth we saw when web first came out, e-commerce came out, mobile came out, right? What's your mobile strategy? What's your e-commerce strategy, right? We saw a ton of companies getting disrupted through e-commerce. And so the boards wanted to know, what is it? And then, hey, what's your generative AI strategy? So the good news for IBM is they've been working on this a lot longer before the froth. And in fact, they went GA on Vela, which was their training supercomputer cloud to be able to train these big models. And what IBM did announce was a service called Watsonx. And there's 3 elements to it. There's the .ai, and that's to train, validate, tune, deploy models. There's the .data, which is essentially a data store for AI. And then governance, .governance, which is to enable responsible, transparent, explainable data and AI workflows. And to its credit, this week, it went freaking GA, general availability. So I did some digging, right? I got with IBM. I think we had 2 calls, 10 emails, 15 documents. Okay, what actually went GA? And it's not because, oh, gosh, I don't trust IBM, but Dan, pretty much everybody that we're looking at, it's not GA. And in fact, there's a very large vendor doing generative AI as a service that can't even explain how they price, right? Here. But today, what went GA? .ai and .data. You can swipe your credit card, multiple countries, multiple languages, and 6 models running on the IBM cloud, which, by the way, is full of 80 gig A100 GPUs in very high performance clusters. So one IBM model, it's an NLP model, 150 million parameters, and you can fine tune the heck out of that thing. More interesting to our audience, 5 Hugging Face models available GA for QA, generate, extract, summarize, classify up to 20 billion parameters. And you can do inference on all these models. So what, right? Like, why is this even part of the show? We rarely do GA. Again, I am unaware of any other enterprise grade service for large language models, any large models, even if they're not language, that is GA today. So props to IBM, and it just shows how ready they were for this. Did not catch them by surprise, and how, quite frankly, ahead they are of even every hyperscaler. I'm not aware of any GA service that any service that's GA that supports Bedrock's not, Google's not, Azure's not, and I don't think that Oracle is as well.
Yeah, I mean, the onslaught of GA will come, I think, in an era where there's a lot of nervousness about data and where data resides, the enterprise graph, how that data gets intertwined with the large language models, how that data then gets used. Trust is a really important currency in this particular arms race to compete. I think we've seen, and Pat, I remember seeing your tweet or LinkedIn post about your sort of declining utilization of generative tools already. And, I don't think you're alone. I think data is pointing to the fact that people have a little early fatigue. They're almost as bored, maybe, as they are with Meta Threads after a week. Thought that one would get you. Okay. Anyway, but it's not so much that they're bored. It's just that the use cases of trying, in a lot of ways, the LLM, the new chat bots are basically the next wave of search, right? It's a new way to organize and distribute. What's old is new again. Remember Cliff Notes? Hello. Welcome to
very much so.
Welcome to what, so this is kind of an instance of what's old is new again. Google originally did its thing to organize all the world's information, and now we're organizing it and giving Cliff Notes to people because people are, you could argue people want to be more efficient, or we're just so lazy that we don't actually have to click the links to figure out what information is good. I think it's hopefully about being more productive. But for companies, and they're the ultimate kind of consumers of technology, it's about the technology being able to make them more efficient, productive, offering better user experiences, CXs, innovations. And you can't do that without your data as part of the graph. You can't do it without the enterprise's data. So just having that open internet data is not really a competitive advantage. In fact, it's already proven to be a commodity. So in order to make it an enterprise success story, you need to be able to A, make the data easily digestible and ingestible, B, give tools that enable enterprises to use that data but protect it from the public internet domain. C, you need to be able to govern it so that the outputs can be trusted or secure or accurate, are constantly learning, training, and evolving. In IBM, what's really interesting is IBM has no interest, not really one iota of interest in being a consumer product here. They're not building something to try to get high adoption among broad internet users, consumers, mobile apps. They're trying to basically say, look, we are 100% committed to building a sandbox, a tool set, a data lake, and a governing platform that enables companies to successfully implement enterprise AI on a business-wide scale to add value for the internal and external resources of the company. So going GA was one thing, Pat, but actually building with that sort of set of guided principles makes them very interesting for this particular space. Now, I've been impressed with Vertex. I've been impressed with some of the things that OpenAI is doing. I think AWS is being heavily underrated right now for what they're going to be able to do. But I do think IBM has been very declarative, clear, concise, and by the way, early, because it's not just about being early about being GA. They've been very early about the proclamation of AI, hybrid cloud, and the enterprise, and their commitment to basically building tools that are able to be run in those environments successfully. And that has also been a big part of their recent ascent into profitability, into growth, into scale. Now, is this going to be the catalyst of IBM breaking away from mid-single digits and single-digit growth into doubles and beyond? It could be, but it is the most compelling.
I mean, if it's not this, what is it going to be? I mean, it could be Red Hat, right?
I mean, I like Red Hat a lot. And by the way, Red Hat's a big part of this story, is the ability to do hybrid enabled enterprise AI. So I like it. I'm happy to see it go GA. I'm really eager to kind of start to hear some of these customer stories come to life. hearing how customers are using this to, to speed up and amplify and successfully deploy enterprise AI.
It's funny. We went crazy when Microsoft was first with and went GA. Like, we both went crazy about them. We gave them a ton of credit with the caveat that, hey, but like, I see this as the same thing. I see IBM right now in the leadership role for enterprise generative AI. Right now, it could change because they're freaking GA. That's a huge deal.
It is a huge deal. It is a huge deal. And obviously, you can hopefully, you can hear my enthusiasm. I'm cautious because I do think you're going to have an onslaught of GAs in the near future.
And based on the markets that IBM is only targeted at, I think IBM is going to have success in regulated industries, large enterprise. Okay, that is a subvariant of the pie, right? Where these other folks, right? It's just like as a service. Who's going to have a bigger as a service Dell and as a service on-prem business, Dell or HP or HPE? It's going to be Dell. Why? Server, storage, networking, security, and PCs. It's kind of an inevitability, but they're behind. So that's kind of the way that I look at it.
Well, and so it's sort of a similar parallel. Like I said, I'm actually very bullish. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how fast this gets deployed and how quickly kind of these customer use cases come. And I think you made a great point about the regulated industries, but I'm actually very, very impressed. I think the governance is being the underrated thing. And I think, and I said this, some of the public concerns about some of the big public cloud LLM technologies should really play to IBM's favor. They should be able to use this and create some momentum, in a way. Of course, they have partnerships with all those players, but in a way that says, hey, we really have narrowed it in, built it in, and squared our entire presence around being governed, managed, secure. Your data is your data. Everyone's saying that, but with IBM, it's something I think the customers will be able to believe from the onset. So, all right, let's hit our last topic. We got a few minutes here. This is not as big of news, but it's good news. It's interesting news. Pat, you see, we talked about a lot of LLMs. Well, Google and Bard, which is kind of the less talked about still, for whatever reason, Pat. We could probably have a debate. Was it because ChatGPT was first? Is it because it's the best? I play with both of them. I've been very public about it. I've got I think both have some strengths and some weaknesses. But Bard and Google, and with Google's DeepMind and Brain and all the technology, it was really never meant to fall behind. It just kind of got the launch wrong. I still believe that to this day. But one of the things that they're doing is they're rapidly expanding. They're making it available to a wider audience, and they brought it to the EU. Obviously the privacy concerns slowed that down a little bit. And now they've gone multilingual. And I thought that was really interesting. It was bound to happen. And, as we know, as I don't know if all Americans are aware, but English is not the only language in the world. It is important that other languages are spoken. And Bard has now come out, I believe it's 40, Pat. And the plan is, to continue to grow. And with obviously, a focus on being more global in scale and overcoming some of these not just language, some of these privacy barriers. The company is going to be able to, I think, continue to expand, to gain rollout, to gain user adoption, and to gain scale. And so this was the company's biggest expansion to date. I do believe that it's a good indicator of the competitiveness. And Pat,
can I share something with you too?
What's that?
Hey, let's get our producers to can I ask our producers to put us some content to show you something?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
You good?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Oh, interesting. I can't share. I'm on Edge. Huh. I'm on Edge and I can't share a Chrome tab. But anyways,
Well,
the other fun thing I found is, type in, what should I do in Austin this weekend? And I think this is even more exciting than the multilingual, but it says, hey, you want to try a new AI powered overview? Try now, right off the search page. So I think this is even bigger than multilingual. This is how.
Wait, say that again. Give me that one more time. What were you able to do?
Go to Google search, what should I do in Austin this weekend? It asks me, hey, do you want to see an AI powered overview? Right. And then it basically gave me Bard, what looks like Bard results. So I think that is even bigger than even this multilingual announcement. It pulls up a prompt that says, hey, this is a search generative experience, right? And then you say yes, and boom. So I thought that was huge.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super cool. So basically the innovation's coming, the advancements, the proliferation of these platforms, the competitiveness is good. Maybe these are some of the things that need to happen, to get this next kind of rocket ship north of users and utilization. And Pat, what do we always say on this show about competition?
Competition is freaking good.
Competition is good. And so when we say that the FTC and certain deals should go through, it's because we don't believe these are competitively problematic for an industry. And when it really is, we think it should be regulated. But in these cases, regardless of regulation, we think Google and Microsoft and some of these open source LLMs all swinging and trying to win is a great thing for us. It's a great thing for innovation, and it's a great thing for all of you. So Pat, we did it. Another week in the books.
I know what we talked about a lot. It's been great to be back for so many weeks. What's on your travel calendar?
Well, I think we're going together next week. You and I will be at .conf. Pat, remember when July used to be an off month?
No, I don't remember any. The only month that I know it's an off month is December. That's it.
No. Isn't reInvent the first part of December? I feel like there's something in December. But yeah, it's most of the month is quiet. But July used to be quieter, and August used to be a little quieter too. And August is shaping up to be an absolute mess. August to November, right through Thanksgiving, Pat, you and I are going to be on the road. You're going to be a crabby man because Pat and too much travel is a no good time for Mr. Moorhead. But we're gonna plow it out. The 6.5 is going to be all over. We're going to be covering a lot of ground, and then of course you and I flipping our caps, running our research companies. We'll also be on the road. We'll be on the tube. We'll be on the pod, and we appreciate all of you joining us this week.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys too. You're about to take us out. I want to talk about my travel, dude. It's not all about you.
I just talked about us. The whole thing was about what we're doing. Yeah.
All right. Anyways,
selfish, man. It's not all about Pat, everybody, but
I'm going to be in Korea at the Samsung event. I hope to see you. I'll be sitting hopefully somewhere near the front to get some good pictures. But I've been to Korea multiple times, but I've never been there for a Samsung event. So really looking forward to it. Wish we could have taken the 6.5 there, but maybe next time.
There you go. So hit that subscribe button. Join us for all of our shows. The lower energy at the end was made up by the high energy throughout the rest of this show. We appreciate y'all tuning in. Stick with us. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.